a pleasure to have you here. I'll be short. First, because I detest long speeches, and second, because for sure you're not here to hear me. This is Professor Yahia Zoubir. He is one of the best specialists in Africa we have in the world. I have the pleasure to meet with him for the first time in Ankara at the NATO Center of Excellence on Fighting Terrorism. And I'll give him the floor, please.
Do I need this, you think? Just mine. Oh, that's yours. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. When I met Yanis in Ankara, I told him I've never been to Latvia. I know Estonia, but not Latvia. And he says, one of these days, you would come and talk to our soldiers. So it's a real pleasure to be here. The area I would be talking about today, and by the way, I know we'll have a Q&A, but when something is not clear to you, stop me right away. Just tell me, what do you mean by this or by that? So I would be talking. I have a tendency of talking a lot, but I think it's going to be a fun session where I will try to give you as much information about this region, which is a very interesting and very complex region. It's not easy to understand it because of the various groups. So when we talk about terrorism, we're talking about a whole gamut of groups. Some of them are very obscure. Others may be manipulated by intelligence services and so on and so forth. Sometimes they are very honest and they say, no, we did not commit that act, and you should believe them. There are times when they say, nope, we didn't do it. So in any case, it's very difficult. So what I would like to do, because I was informed about touching upon the Sahel this morning, but I would start from the north, North Africa. And I wrote in one article some years ago that, for instance, in US foreign policy, it's no longer the Maghreb as such, but the Maghreb Sahel. It's, because of the what happened. And I'm going to explain it from its beginning. I have a rather different approach to terrorism. I don't take terrorism as being a phenomenon sui generis. That is, it's like a vacuum. There is terrorism. It's like something that appears out of the blue. And having been involved in research in doing this, I realized that we start by looking at the socio-economic conditions and political conditions of given countries. And also distinguishing between extremist groups and groups that are not necessarily violent, just like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt recently. The Muslim Brotherhood was never really an extremist group. But of course, within various groups, I'm making your lives very difficult, within various groups you have ranges. It ranges from the most quietest to the most violent. And I will talk about Algeria specifically at some point, because you will see what happened in the 1990s, in a sort of evolution from peaceful, relatively peaceful, to very extreme, which resulted in the deaths of about 200,000 people over a decade. So it was very complex. Now, I always start with the conditions. I cover usually the region that stretches from Morocco to Libya. Egypt is another beast, but I will touch upon it. I'll be more than happy to answer questions that you might have on that. If Islam or political Islam has grown basically in the early 60s. Although the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was created in 1928, but in terms of people talking about political Islam, it started, I would say, with Sayyid Qutb in Egypt in 1960s, and he was hanged, as you know, by President Nasser. But there were always movements within North Africa that called for, going back to the roots of Islam. Salafis. The Salaf comes from the word, because you're going to hear a lot about Salafi movement, Salafi this, Salafi that. Salaf means, following on the footsteps of the Prophet. In other words, the good deeds, doing good, doing right. So you will find Salafis who are very quiet, want to change the way people behave, the way they eat, and so on, to go back to the roots of Islam. But you also have the Salafis who are the jihadists, or the holy warriors. Although, by the way, jihad has different meanings. You hear it in the Western world, oh, jihad, jihad. Well, jihad means, fighting against one's temptations. And there's the word which comes from it, which is ijtihad. In other words, how to always become better, and to even read the texts more rationally and so on. But there is the version of jihad which is fighting against the people who want to hurt you. In other words, the ones who want to hurt your religion or to hurt your family and so on, which exists also in Christianity, with St. Augustine and so on, with, the just war, the concept of just war. You're not aggressive by nature, but if someone wants to hurt you, you would do that. I want to specify a little bit about the concepts. But then you take North Africa as, how should I put it, as a region, although it has not succeeded in getting integrated. So when you take the Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, these were the four, and Mauritania, which constituted at some point, the Union of the Arab Maghreb, okay? So that's when I say Maghreb, these are the five countries that we're talking about. Of course, you can add Western Sahara, which is occupied by Morocco. So if you had to do what the French call an état des lieux, that is, you look at a region and say, what was happening? If you had to put a timing as to when terrorism or the real problems with political Islam or what have you occurred, that was mostly in the 1980s. This came after I would say after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and one would say, how come a regime as strong as the regime of the Shah of Iran, before, Iran was a sort of agent of the United States in the region and was very powerful army, very repressive regime, had a secret service that was very nasty, brutal, the SAVAK, In any case, and no one expected that regime to collapse, but it did thanks to a religious figure of Ayatollah Khomeini, for instance. So that had a sort of impact in the North Africa region where people said, hey, with the force of Islam, we can bring down even the worst, dictator. So we need to do that. Then came, and you experienced it, the wave of democratization around the world. And with the wave of democratization in the 80s, there was a sort of opening up of the regimes in the region. Things started to look rather good, the prospects. And you will see if you take every regime by itself, there were some changes and so on and so forth. And there was really hope that North Africa will undergo the same process as Eastern and Central Europe and I guess the Baltics and so on. Some parties emerged. There was a party in Tunisia, small Tunisia, which is usually a very quiet, very nice society, very homogeneous, not having many ethnic groups. It's, you know, it's a particular country. But there was a movement that emerged at that time called Al-Nahda. Al-Nahda, which means Renaissance. And believe it or not, it was led by Rashid Ghannouchi, who is today a big figure in Tunisia because he went into exile after that. But Tunisia was ruled by someone, Ben Ali, who fled the country in 2011 on 14th January. Initially, he was sort of open to the idea that we can have, you know, some sort of democracy with an Islamist group or party to play the game of democracy. But soon after that, he crushed the movement. He found up to today, it's not known whether it was really the party that did it or some crazy, you know, extremists within the party, or it was really the regime that orchestrated that. So they killed a couple of policemen, they burned them. He decided, okay, the party is banned, and so on. And so they were sent underground, and Ghannouchi fled the country. That's for Tunisia. The most complex, and I'd like, if you don't mind, talking about it more, is Algeria. Because Algeria, I am sure you heard a lot about it, especially in the 1990s, and it's still not over. And it has implications for the Sahel as well, which is something people don't know. In Algeria, there were always, for those of you who are interested, I can send you references or my own writings on the subject. But in Algeria, historically, there were some groups. It started in the 60s as well, with the influence of the ones from Egypt, because there were some teachers who had come and all that. You know, it's sophisticated. The story of terrorism and so on has to be studied, you know, rationally and to understand what happened. In any case, but there was the notion, which you probably would empathize with. Many of the what we call Islamists were saying capitalism has not produced the benefits for us that we thought. And it's an ideology that we don't like very much. Communism is horrible. You know that there's no more anti-communist as the Islamists, because they see communism as atheism, as, you know, being against God, and so on and so forth. So basically, some of them even try to attack Russian, or rather Soviet interests in Algeria. They try to do that. But the real force, and here you see the link between socio-economic problems and the rise of terrorism. First, it was in Algeria, what happened is that once the country opened up following, an uprising by the youth who were tired of the, authoritarian regime and, the corruption and so on and so forth, which you see throughout North Africa and when we go down. What happened is a party, and for those of you who follow political science jargon, it was a catch-all party that appeared. It didn't matter, you could be liberal and join that party, which in essence was religious. But it had people, anybody who was upset, including people in the armed forces, because some of them would join the terrorist groups later. Not very many, but there were, especially at the lower ranks, sergeant, a couple of lieutenants did, and they were very famous, like the Al-Para and all that, and they were from the special forces, and then they joined, the terrorist groups. So, but what happened is that, the party emerged, attracted people of all walks of life, because it promised a better life, and it was right on target in attacking the regime and what was going on. And they said, we are the true revolutionaries. We are the ones who follow the principles of the anti-colonialist policies and so on and so forth. I would skip a little bit because I will end up staying here until 5 o'clock today. But what happened is that within this catch-all party, it went from those who believed in elections to the ones who said elections or democracy is haram, it's sin, because there is only the law of God. How can you have democracy? How can you let the people decide when God is the decision maker, really? So it was, different groups. To make a story short, and this is still relevant to today because it may happen again in a different form, but it may happen again. The ones who were favorable to elections won, in the sense that they said, let's participate in the legislative. There were municipal elections. They won overwhelmingly. So they had all the municipalities, and they started applying Sharia law. You know Sharia, right? The Islamic law. Okay, it's things that it's called Sharia. Okay, so they started doing that, and then there was another election, the legislative elections, and the first round they won. So the military, mostly the military, and also civilians, by the way, they decided that the process should be stopped. Because once they come to power, they will stay in power. They will not leave. It will be one vote, one time, and that's it. True or false, we don't know. At that time I was favorable to the cancellation because the country was not prepared. These people had a dangerous speech. They would say, we will have tribunal or popular tribunals to try the military, the heads of the military. We will do this, we will do that. And of course, if I was a soldier at that time, I would have done the same thing. I would have canceled the elections, and The problem is that it led to a fragmentation because the government canceled the elections and at the same time banned the party, and the party exploded into various groups. Various groups, and all the, if you wish, all those radicals turned to the more liberal and said, you see, we told you, democracy doesn't work. We won, and they took away our victory. So we take up arms. What was rather puzzling is that they found weapons very easily. There was a lot of weaponry. They took some from the military ambushes and so on and so forth. They were very good. And for those of you who have ever been to Algeria, Algeria has different, it has mountains, has woods, has, it's a huge country, people can hide. But what happened is that, and it might be of interest to you, in that many of the terrorists, the ones who really became terrorists, who would kill soldiers, policemen, students, they didn't care. They had different targets, and if they suspected that you were pro-government, you were dead. If you were out against them, or if you did anything against, they would kill. And they killed in the most brutal ways that you can ever imagine. I would not describe them to you. I've seen some scenes, some pictures. It's just horrible. And there were massacres and so on and so forth. The problem is, and it's up to today, a lot of people, still population, supported them. Some through threat, and others because they believe that they're going to bring them, peace and justice and happiness and so on. And for instance, if you know anything about some Muslim societies, they're very conservative, but with the socio-economic conditions, the youth were marginalized. They had no homes and no nothing, but these, self-proclaimed imams, religious figures, they would promise them heaven. And the Muslim heaven is fantastic, because you can fornicate all you want, you can have all the women, you can drink all you want, everything that is banned on earth, you can have it in heaven. So if you are a guy who has not been able to get married, does not have a home, and you tell him, look, here is a gun, you're going to fight for God, and if you die, you go to heaven, and in heaven you have everything you want. Of course he's going to go and die, because he says, I'm dead down here, so I go and do it. That's why they were not afraid. Of course, if you want me to elaborate, they got into some special drugs that would make them, able to do whatever they do, etc., etc. So it was a decade of, I remember going to Algeria during that period. I could not go anywhere because you may be walking and a whole bus load will explode. They put bombs in public places, they put whatever. Now, they were different. Why am I talking a lot about Algeria? Because Algeria will have direct relevance to the Sahel. Okay? Morocco is not too much there because I paused a little bit for Algeria and I come back to it. Because you say, where is Morocco here in this story? In Morocco, the king is considered, the commander of the faithful. So he's a religious figure and he claims descendants from the Prophet of Islam. So there were some groups, but they were repressed before, at the embryonic level, in the egg, boom. King Hassan II at that time, repressed them so harshly that they more or less disappeared, but they remained, and we know that the Morocco now suffers because the movement eventually became internationalized. It's transnational now. It could be happening here in Riga. I don't know. I don't wish it for you, but it can be anywhere. Anywhere. So Morocco is not much to talk about. Libya witnessed also some terrorism. There were some groups that emerged, also very much alienated by the regime, and the Gaddafi regime repressed them really badly. Really badly. He even sent, there were rumors at the time, and I think they're not just rumors, where he sent MiGs, the Soviet and Russian military aircraft, to bomb some regions where the Islamists were, and he said the rumors is that the pilots were East Germans. Okay, from East Germany. So, in any case, but the story that there was a group that came out in Libya, very powerful, the Libyan fighting group, and they were imprisoned, but then the regime in 2009, freed them. They said, okay, if you say, their leader who is now in the government in Libya, and apparently he was one of the Al-Qaeda member, but they renounced terror and said we made a mistake, we should not have done what we did. So that's the other, so they're not, it was not that important compared to Algeria. Why is Algeria important? Algeria is important because there was a succession of extremely brutal terrorist groups. There were the GIAs, the armed Islamic groups. They called themselves armed Islamic groups. Then there was a split within them, and the one of them was known as the GSPC. The GSPC, let me try to translate it from French. The Salafi, now you see the term, Salafi group for predication and combat. What was new about it? This group, which was born in 1998, said, we do not attack civilians. What the GIAs did in the past was wrong. They attacked civilians, and that was not right. We will target military people and policemen, and gendarmes, armed people. These are the people that we will attack. But in the meantime, if I may open a parenthesis, since I'm talking to a crowd in the Defense Department, Algeria never had forces specialized in anti-terrorism. So when terrorism started in the after the cancellation of the election, it started 92, 93. Like one general told me, he said, you have a nice soldier who was, driving tanks, and then he's face to face with his Kalashnikov with a terrorist that has a beard going all the way down, coming out of the bush. He said he would pee in his pants. He said that was the reality, because the other one was used to only driving a tank, or fighting against a foreign invasion. So they didn't. So in the beginning, the military incurred a lot of defeats. I mean, soldiers died, and the conscripts, they were young, they didn't know how to fight a war or anti-terrorist war. But then the government started getting more and more sophisticated. Of course, the Europeans, by the way, now who are crying, screaming and all, it was not until after 9/11 that they changed the way they looked at terrorism. I can assure you of that, because Algeria fell under sort of unspoken embargo. There were no weapons. I remember interviewing people in the Defense Department in Algeria, and they would say, we don't have weapons. We broke. The Europeans are saying, no, for human rights reasons, you cannot have them, etc., etc. So they came to the former Soviet republics. They went to Bulgaria, or to, give us some spare parts. They went to Turkey or South Africa. Please give us something to put. I remember that they were telling me they used to work on, parts by themselves, being creative, and pray that the plane would not crash or the helicopter would not crash. So, but then they became very sophisticated, and the situation turned in favor of the authorities. So they basically said, look, you need to lay out your arms. If you lay down your weapons, you can come back to society, we'll forgive you, blah, blah, blah. That worked. This happened after the huge massacres that some of you may have heard of in the 1990s, like in 97. There were huge massacres. People, in one night, 600 people were executed, slaughtered. But there was the main force, which was called the Islamic Salvation Army, AIS in its French acronyms, in 1997, entered into a deal with the government and said, we will help you even fight the terrorist groups, the cells, the most radical cells. And of course, the interpretation of the massacres is that the radical groups went after the larger group that decided to have armistice with the authorities. So one group was born, the one that I told you, the Salafi group. And so when the Algerian armed forces, security forces, became very, very efficient. Why? Because first, they penetrated, they had moles within the terrorist groups. So you had intelligence people who participated in the massacres and all. They had no choice. But they had more information progressively. the population started getting tired of the terrorists because they were attacking the civilians and they were extortioning, taking from them. They would go and say, look, we need money, we need your jewelry, we need this, we need that. And people were really tired of them in many ways. And the security forces had a true anti-terrorist training. Some of them had gone to Syria or to Egypt or whatever. And so they were very competent. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because once they became effective, they really, really hit the GSPC hard. So the GSPC, when you hear about it today, the main leader is somewhere in the mountains in Algeria in hiding, but the rest was pushed to the south. So what happened in the south, and if you can look, initially they went to the south in Algeria, within the Sahara, not the Sahel, the Sahara. And you probably remember that one former paratrooper, Saifi, known as El Para, the paratrooper, parachutist, led a, what do you call that? It was the first hostage taking. They took Austrian and German and whatever tourists. The Algerians freed them, and then now you get into the, if you want, in the Q&A, we can discuss the ransom payments, because how do the terrorists finance themselves? So this was, the Germans had given, I don't know how many millions of euros, the Austrians did the same, the Spaniards did the same, the Italians did the same, the Canadians, the French, they all pay. They all pay ransoms. So that was one form. But the real situation became really dire is when they went, the terrorists settled in northern Mali. You see what the point of that arrow is? A little bit farther there. That's where the terrorists settled. And they established a state within the state. You remember right after 9/11, the United States started talking about safe havens. In other words, sanctuaries where terrorists can settle and operate freely. So that was one of the, and so the US started getting interested in that region immediately after 9/11. Even without the presence of terrorists. Of course, some people said they created the terrorists. So you have to be very careful when dealing with this subject. But I will take it at face value, just to tell you, and you know what the US did. It created the Pan-Sahel Initiative in 2002. The Pan-Sahel Initiative was to bring some of the countries like Mali, Niger, Mauritania, these were the first ones, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and Chad, into some sort of initiative to train them, to teach them how to combat terrorism and so on and so forth. Of course, the Pan-Sahel Initiative eventually became the Trans-Saharan Counter-Terrorism Partnership, which obviously includes now Morocco, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and so on. And Algeria, Tunisia, even Libya was to be part of it. Not under Gaddafi, but it was getting to it. In any case, now, what you need to understand about this situation, because Yanis wanted me to talk to you about the Sahel, and I think he's right. Here you have to look at what happened in the Sahel. The Sahel, by the way, is a huge ocean. What we call the Sahel goes from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. It's a whole, area. I forgot how many thousands of. It's huge. It's thousands and thousands of square meters, And weak governments. This is why I always link terrorism with socio-economic conditions and political conditions. It's what we call fragile states, or failed states, or weak states. If you look at all the Sahelian states, they're very poor. Most people live on $1.5 a day or less. So it's very, very poor. Corrupt governments, absolutely corrupt governments, and I insist on that. And then the drug dealers started getting in there. The US was very effective in combating drug trafficking from Colombia to the US, so they changed routes. Now they go through Guinea-Bissau here. So it comes all the way from Colombia or elsewhere, and it comes here, and then it goes straight, and now, since I'm following the issue of drugs, it goes to the Middle East, to the rich Emirates. Cocaine, you know, the healthy stuff, the good, expensive stuff. So, but seriously, so why is it important to know about the drug trafficking? Because it's not just the drug trafficking. It's a combination of illicit activities, cigarettes, light weapons, spare parts, anything you want, with the complicity, of course, of governments, corrupt governments. So what happened in Mali is that the terrorists settled in the north, which is dominated by Tuareg, which is an ethnic group, and different Arabs, and so on. Different ones. And the government in Bamako was, as long as they don't touch me, I'm okay. Because in 2007, there was the GSPC transformed itself into Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. That's the beginning of this tough story which is going on up to today, or which will take us to what happened in Mali. They settled there, and ATT, that's the name of the acronym of the president of Mali, Amani Toure, was basically saying, if they don't touch, it's okay. There was like a modus vivendi. But he neglected his military in the north. They were very ill equipped, demoralized, and their leadership was involved in drug trafficking. They closed their eyes, and even in Bamako there was drug trafficking. So the situation got very complex. It was dominated. Now, an important event happened. Important event took place. It was the war in Libya. People underestimated the consequences of the war in Libya. The war in Libya exacerbated the problems in northern Mali. Why? First of all, because in northern Mali, the regime in Bamako had not treated the Tuareg fairly. There were different agreements, and the government never lived by those agreements. So there was never any real development of the northern region. It was neglected. They were left to their own. And if there is any lesson that you need to take from what I'm saying, when the state is not present, the drug dealers have a wonderful life. Why? Because they had the support of the population. Al-Qaeda intermarried. They married Tuareg women, so they were part of the society. They gave money to the population. They paid young people to observe military movements and so on. But they were all paid. So there was a nice redistribution of the selling or the transit, because the drug traffickers pay the Al-Qaeda to guarantee safe transit, safe passage. So Al-Qaeda would be, with its weapons and so on. Why is Libya important? It is because the Tuareg who were serving under the Legion, the Gaddafi Legion, once they felt that the government in Libya was gone, it was over, they decided to move back to northern Mali, to the Azawad. This is the region that they claim, and they said, now we proclaim independence. In the meantime, there was a coup d'etat in Mali proper, in Bamako, by a captain. Who knows who encouraged him to orchestrate the coup, especially since he was trained by the United States. So that coup proved fatal because the guy said, look, I have grievances against the government, it's not helping. Because the Tuareg destroyed the troops in northern Mali very easily, but they slaughtered them. And that created, again, more animosity. If you're following what's going on today, that's why the negotiations are very hard. And of course, the Tuareg are not a unified group, a unified movement. You had the MNLA, you had the Ansar ad-Din, which is a new group, claiming to be a religious group. And it's a mixture. It's a complicated situation. In any case, what to do? What to do? And in northern Mali, eventually what happened is that because of the sanctions, the guy who orchestrated the coup sort of stepped aside. No, he did not leave completely. He stepped aside, and of course, one of the agreements is that he would get the title of president, former president of Mali. That was his condition. But now he's in jail, by the way. But I don't know who used him, but that's what happened. So, when these troops came back, the Tuareg from Libya, they came back, and I don't have the, if you want, I have an article where I listed how much they brought back. They were about 3,000 troops, very well trained in combat, they brought back missiles, name it, 4x4 vehicles, absolutely outstanding. So they went inside and they settled there, they proclaimed independence and so on. And then, as I said, there was another group, Ansar ad-Din. Ansar ad-Din initially never wanted the partition of Mali. The MNLA wanted independence, just to put the picture. Al-Qaeda didn't care. Al-Qaeda, as long as it business as usual, it was okay. So, and I will stop in 5 minutes so that you can, I see you look at the watch. I'm okay? Okay. So what happened is, it's still very bizarre as to why there was a coalition between Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and the Tuareg, Ansar ad-Din, to move southward. Now, nobody knows what they want to do. Either to take up the airport, the strategic airport, or in the strategic city, or maybe they were moving to Bamako, to the capital, and say, this is the new country. This is, we control the whole country, and that's it. And we impose Sharia law and all that. I am not so sure about that, because Mali there was a lot of weird, relationships, and the role that France plays and so on. So when in January 2013, those troops were moving, France intervened. Now I can tell you one thing about France's intervention. It had been prepared well before. And for those of you who are interested in the French military, they could not have done it without the United States, which provided all the intelligence and the refueling in the air. Same with Great Britain. And of course the Algerians, who provided free fuel, allowed them to go through the airspace. And the Algerians also closed the border, but you see how big that border is. Algeria's border with Mali is 1,376 kilometers. So you can imagine. But the Algerians sent 30,000 troops and tried to, close, to prevent the terrorists from escaping and entering Algeria. So that helped the French a lot. Now, as a consequence, just days later, a breakaway group from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the one with Ben Makhtar, you probably have heard of him, for those of you who are in intelligence. So they said those who are committed to the blood, something, to the oath. So they arranged for a takeover of the gas plant in Algeria, in Tigan near Inaminas. And of course, maybe you know this about the Algerians. The Algerians have a policy of no negotiation with terrorists. So it took a couple of days. The special forces did a fantastic job. They killed in the process 30 out of 32 of the terrorists, but in the process 38 foreign workers were killed. But they were going to be killed anyway because some of them were being killed right at the plant. By the way, that live base had 850 people, so you can imagine if the explosion had taken place in that gas plant. But they were going with the hostages to take them maybe to northern Mali or somewhere where they would, start negotiating with Western powers. Because you need to know that everything, most of the finances, most of the funding of the terrorist groups is the result of the payment of ransoms, very much so. I talked with the head of the CAERT, there's a center for le Centre de Recherche, the African Center for Research and something on terrorism. And he gave me the figure. He said it's $300 million that they had collected, which is 10 times the budget of Mali. Okay? That's one thing. Drugs, the fallout of the drugs, because with the terrorists, there are different prices. If you are passing through with your drugs, you pay a certain amount per kilo of cocaine. It's quite a bit. Or if you store it. So this is one way. And then you have all the cigarettes and other weapons and so on and so forth. Now, France intervened in Mali. It's not just for Mali, because France also has big interest in Niger. Some people don't know 33% of France's energy comes from Niger. But if you know how much Niger gets in exchange, you would laugh. It's not very expensive because, again, all corrupt. And the people from Niger, they see a base, Arriva, which has so much money and extracts the uranium from Niger, but they live in sheer poverty. So, but again, if you want, we can talk about geopolitics. All these issues are also related to China's presence. China is now interested in Niger, and there's the possibilities of oil and so on. Now, there's one other point that you cannot talk about what's going on there without talking about AFRICOM. AFRICOM came to, basically the idea was launched in 2007 by President George W. Bush. So it was, the US wanted to have strategic command for Africa, the US command for Africa. So in 2007, he announced it and he said it should be in place by 2008, which it was. Now, the US was looking for a country to host it. But most African states said no, because it would be too dangerous, because it would attract all the terrorists and so on and so forth. If I have it in my country, it's going to be hell. But AFRICOM now is based in Stuttgart. That's where the headquarters are. That's where the war on Libya was, that was the spot from which it was conducted. And there is a base, intelligence base in the UK. And now probably the most important base, the only military base that the United States has in Africa is in Djibouti. Djibouti is probably not even visible on the map if we had it. It's so small. But it's the most sophisticated base which controls most of Eastern Africa, where, you know, the US feels it has strategic interests, terrorism, and so on. Now, if you had to count how many terrorists there are, you ask yourself the question, there are not that many. When we talked about the presence of terrorists in northern Mali, no one disputed the figure that there were no more than 500. But then there was, again, as I said, there's a multiplication factor, like the Mujao. You probably have heard of the Mujao. This is a new group because just like any movement, they also have their own problems, ethnic problems. There were some people from Niger, Mauritania, Chad, I mean the terrorists from that region, and Malians, who are black, they said, well, Al-Qaeda is dominated by whites. So they created the Mujao, the movement for oneness and jihad in West Africa. So that's one other issue. And Mujao was in cahoots, closer to the drug traffickers, by the way. And its first action was in Western Sahara. They went to the refugee camps and they kidnapped, some aid workers, two from Spain and one from Italy. So the situation today is in northern Mali, there's still, in Mali, not northern Mali, but in Mali in general, there is no reconciliation yet. They're trying, as you know, there's a new government with Ibrahim Boubacar and so on. It seems to be moving in the right direction, but it's still not solved because, again, I will end where I started, because of the socio-economic conditions. Nothing has changed in northern Mali in terms of development. People are very poor. The state is not addressing the needs of the people in that region. So we're continuing with the same. Yes, Mali was able to raise some money from the donors, but at the same time, the problems of governance, the problems of corruption and so on are continuing. So I think the situation now is going through sort of status quo. But the Sahel will remain a dangerous place because it's huge, because it's easy to hide, it's easy to travel. Although now with the drones, the US has, scored some successes. Maybe that there are bases all over. Djibouti is the big base, but the US has secretly, but I know about it, then it's no longer a secret. So there's a drone base in Niger, there's a drone base in Ethiopia, and so on. Especially and even Kenya apparently, and wherever there is a little something terrorist attack, there is going to be drones and some military activity. But up until now, the US has not succeeded in getting, you know, for AFRICOM, a country that will host it, but for all practical purposes, Djibouti is. And Djibouti, once again, I just wrote a piece with a Chinese colleague on Djibouti, and the problems are similar to what's going on in the Sahel. The regime is corrupt. You know, the money that comes from the rent of the base, they got 38 million a year, and in Carlemonier, and then the French also get, you know, give them like 35 or whatever million, so which is peanuts, by the way, but that money is, you know, for the elite to have, and they also get some money from the trade that goes through from Ethiopia to the Gulf countries, you know, or to Yemen and so on. So there too, you could expect something to happen because the population does not see any advantages coming from this huge military base, very sophisticated. The US has invested more than 1.5 billion in revamping the base. It's becoming one of the most sophisticated bases, you know. So at least I can tell you, not to end on a negative note, as long as we don't have the right policies, as long as we have this, you know, the perpetuation of underdevelopment, of, you know, the corruption, and corruption is like a dance, you know, you need another partner. So the West is not, you know, very innocent in that business. So as long as we have these problems, I think that we will see more of terrorists who basically, if you study the profile of terrorists, it's not the terrorist or the anarchist of the time of Bakunin and all that. Now you have a terrorist who can be an engineer and say, what the hell am I doing on this earth? I have no job. You know, I was the best student in my class and so on, and I don't have a job. So I can make, you know, can make bombs for the terrorists and so on, and I may end up in heaven. Voila for, in a nutshell, what is happening in the region. And so I'd be more than happy to take questions from you.